Hi, my name is Zach. I've decided every time I make a new video, I'm going to try on a new hat. This isn't particularly pertaining to the various readings that I'm doing, but I figure that it'll make it just 1% more interesting than it already is, considering it's just videos of me talking. And it's only for the professor, I assume. I don't assume this will become very popular. But anyway, that's enough introductions. This is over the Plessy vs. Ferguson book that I had to get, pages 1 through 20, and The Mismeasure of Man, pages 51 through 62. I have to summarize each of them, connect them together, and yeah. Now, the first thing we're going to be going into is Plessy vs. Ferguson stuff. A lot of racism against black people obviously happened in the South. The Jim Crow laws were designed to keep people segregated. Plessy vs. Ferguson was actually a planned event. It was all planned out by a man named Albion Wenger Tourget. He was a crusader basically helping a bunch of colored people down in the South getting the proper rights that they needed. He put Homer Plessy up. He put him up to the task of getting in trouble so he could make the court case happen and make laws in place to support that black people need as much rights as anyone else. What was happening in the South at the time was the Reformation. And the Reformation was meant to do two specific things. The first was repairing the damage from the Civil War, and the second was reforming the slave society known as the South. After slavery was abolished, many states passed black codes allowing African Americans to own property and etc. But it was also became known as disguised slavery because certain laws would turn African Americans into slaves once again after, like, say they did something wrong, they would be put to labor. In 1866, the Civil Rights Act made African Americans full citizens with rights. President Andrew Johnson tended to be very strict with Reconstruction in the South, and he wanted to section areas off into war zones. And more things along those lines. The Senate wasn't okay with that. Most of the Senate at the time were Republicans, so every time he would do something, they even tried to impeach him. Every time that he would make a move, they would veto him immediately, so he couldn't get much accomplished. Once he was out of office, next came in this next era of Reconstruction. The first era was under Andrew Johnson. It was the presidential Reconstruction. This one was known as the Radical Reconstruction because it was majorly led by the Radical Republicans, as they were known at the time. The Democrats at the time were very opposed to Reconstruction. But the Radical Republicans at the time, they had more say because the very next election, Ulysses S. Grant was put into office, and he supported a lot of their ideals. He passed many laws and amendments that helped African Americans, like the 15th Amendment allowing African Americans to vote. Reconstruction ultimately failed because it was basically the plan of the North to subjugate the South under the rules of African Americans and carpetbaggers. Basically payback after the Civil War. Also, no one was really concerned with actually improving the South. Everyone was merely trying to go after their own interests. Carpetbaggers were trying to capitalize on the fact that the South was in such a destitute state, so they were trying to make money off of it, really. Reconstruction finally did end whenever Rutherford B. Hayes entered office in 1876. As I already said, the 15th Amendment was created to prevent states from denying voters solely based on skin color or things such as that. The 13th Amendment was to prevent slavery as much as possible. These two amendments made the definition of political and critical rights skewed because everyone didn't really know who deserved the right to vote, and how to ensure black African freedom, because obviously way after those amendments were passed, there's still racism and stuff in the South. It's hard to make civil rights for one specific group without hurting another group. Civil rights became direct rights that legally protected groups of people. So that was kind of their solution to the problem. Political rights were more along the lines of, you can't stop them from voting, stuff like that. The 14th Amendment and the case of Dred Scott helped to give everyone citizenship, further defining what it means to be a citizen. For instance, state citizenship and U.S. citizenship were two separate things. The very first court case that was ruled on the 13th and 14th Amendment was in 1873. Apologies. The slaughterhouse cases, where a group of white butchers felt that their rights were infringed upon. There were a group of white butchers that felt their rights were infringed upon, so they tried to use the laws under the 13th and 14th Amendment to get off, because in New Orleans, where the area it actually happened in, they had passed a couple laws that prevented certain things that a butcher could do. The justices had to remind them the fact that the amendments were passed majorly for the African Americans and they weren't really affected by it. Basically, everything that had to do with rights at the time was very confused by everyone. And next, the mismeasure of man. This one was a very short amount because there were a lot of big words that are hard to understand. But I got the basic gist of what they were trying to say. Starting off, Socrates explains that there are three different ways to divide people up: rulers, auxiliaries, and craftsmen, and they were made of different materials. Obviously, the rulers were made of gold, the auxiliaries were made of silver, and the craftsmen were made of iron or brass. People, once again, are divided by race, sex, class, and basically by biology. So it's the idealism that people are born into different roles that throughout society. He also describes how science is a very complex mechanism to use, but a very primary way to tackle the problem of determinism. Determinism is, as I described, where you are in society, where you are today, is predetermined. All of that stuff. Okay. When one is born into a place, they are meant to be there. Biological determinism is one huge thing, something that not one man, not one book can can talk all about. At least, the bigger portion of it. I can talk about it briefly, but I can't make one book to describe all of it because it touches so many separate things. One problem they run into is, whenever it comes along this, reification. Basically, when you know something as you do, changing the ideas are a challenge. So if I say I was born in the South, I was an aristocratic, and I owned slaves at one point, then the Reformation happened. I would always think of black people as slaves. I would have a very, very tough time thinking of them as anything else. That's not a thing personally against me, it's just how I think. Times change. You understand. The next is ranking, how we divide men based upon what we know of people. The next thing we need to remember is intelligence in a person is very important, but also one that if someone is too smart, they come off as bad or different than everyone else altogether. Biological determinism is a theory of limits, where it looks at where one group stands and sees where it should be. Now, as I've described all of this, there are a lot of similarities. Basically, the mismeasure of man describes what it was to be the Reformation in the South as Plessy versus Ferguson. Everyone already thought of all these African Americans as still slaves. It's hard to change someone's mind once they're already set on it, because the South was such a slave society and their mindset was based heavily on that. So scientifically, they weren't wrong in the way they were thinking. It was just the way they were going about it was very, very bad. They couldn't help what they were thinking because that's how they were raised. And the North and the carpetbaggers and all people like that were kind of capitalizing on that because they could. That's it.